Hello, my name is Alexander Kiri. Welcome to the program. Armenia is going through a political turmoil since last week. What seemed to be the end of a peaceful protest with the resignation of former President Sargsyan after his failed try to be Prime Minister sparked deeper changes in the Armenian society. After celebrating Mr. Sargsyan's resignation, protesters are now asking for more. Joining us in the studio for an overview of the situation is Anton Pechenkin, political analyst. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's take a look back to last week. After trying to cling to power and changing his post from president to prime minister, why did Sargsyan give up so fast?
Firstly, many observers have stated that the resignation of Sargsyan isn't his defeat in general, because the party he is the leader of and which is standing behind his back, it still holds the majority in the Armenian parliament, and still is going to approve some other close to Sargsyan person to be a prime minister, the position which holds the most part of authority and power within the Armenian political system.
So, for viewers to understand, because it might look a bit complex from the outside point of view, how does the Armenian political system work? It looks like a parliamentary system, but how does it work in substance?
Now it's the first time after the serious change in Armenian political system, just like the other most post-Soviet countries, beginning with Russia and ending with some Middle Asia regimes. They were mostly presidential, and so was Armenia. It was maybe even super presidential republic, with president leading the executive powers and have a very serious as extra-constitutional authority within the country. But when the second presidential term of Sargsyan was going to its end, he offered to make a political reform and to make Armenia a parliamentary republic. And as also it's rather usual for as we had it in Ukraine, as it had been in other post-Soviet countries, the main aim of Sargsyan was to transit from presidential position to prime minister. And as we see, his attempt failed.
So he fell in his own trap in some sort of way.
It seems to be, yes.
So also to understand, so it's a parliamentary, more parliamentary regime now. Who are the main actors here? We have the parties of Mr. Sargsyan, of course, and the opposition party, but there seem to be other forces around. The division between political forces and political parties, Armenian, aren't so important and so drastic as, for example, in Ukraine and other, for example, or Georgia, other countries of region, because they are all more or less pro-Russian, and the discussion isn't going about changing foreign policy of Armenia. Of course, this political party who is the leader of protests, So the Republican Party in English.
The Republican Party is the party of Sargsyan, and the main opposition party is Yolk, if I pronounce it correctly. So, and observers say that this opposition is mostly connected with Armenian diaspora, Western Armenian diaspora in Europe and America, but it does not mean that they deny possibility of future pro-Russian course, maybe less pro-Russian than it had been, but still.
They are backed by Western diaspora and Western support, but their political agenda is not necessarily different than the...
Speaking about, foreign policy, it is not so much difference. But speaking about the internal domestic politics, the main point of critics is that the Sargsyan regime and his party is corrupted, and they are alienated from the simple Armenians, and as it
could be said, the main point of critics is that government must be more close to simple Armenians.
So now let's focus on the personality of leader of the opposition, Nikol Pashinyan. He was already under the spotlight before these new protests. So after Mr. Sargsyan's resignation, what does he want? Does he want to be prime minister? Does he want to lead deeper reforms? What does he want exactly?
So actually, Pashinyan is the only public speaker of the protesters, but he, as it seems, he is not some unquestionable authority. And for the protesters and for the opposition, it's for the first point. And secondly, what about his ambitions to become a prime minister? There is still a question whether should be new elections, new parliamentary elections or not. And the latest declarations of Pashinyan and the opposition, it was demand to hold such new elections, and but the authority, it looks like resignation of Sargsyan, it was a tactic step just to give part of what was demanded in order to preserve the majority of Republican Party, of Sargsyan's party, within the parliament. And so what will be the next processes going in Armenia, it's very interesting and couldn't be prognosed fully.
Now we'll go back to the Western diaspora and the Armenian diaspora, because it seems to have an important role in the process. But US and EU called recently for restraint and dialogue. Do you think there is any risk for the peaceful protests so far to become violent?
Of course, the modern authorities, which former Sargsyan's team, they have an opportunity and desire to use that force that they have. But on the other hand, there are much signals that within the so-called siloviki, within these military and police organizations, there are a very serious opposition to the ruling government, and they must very seriously consider the possibility of violent stopping of protest actions.
Now, we talked about the US and EU. Let's talk about Russia. So Peskov and Russia in general is closely, I quote Mr. Peskov here, closely monitoring the situation. What is at stake for Russia here?
For Russia, firstly, of course, first moment that Armenia is one of the strongest Russia's allies in the region, and Armenia is the member of this organization of collective security treaty, ODKB in Russian. And Russia is very interested to preserve its influence within Armenia and the region.
It has a base in Armenia, by the way.
Yes. And they have a military base in Armenia, and Russian capital, Russian oligarchs control a very huge share of Armenian economy. On the second hand, Russia and Moscow have perpetuously demonstrated that they want to be neutral within the Karabakh conflict, and they try to be on the same distance from Baku and Azerbaijan in this issue. And but as I have already stated, as the ruling government, as the opposition in Armenia, they are in different in different measures, but they are both pro-Russian. So Russia isn't to lose everything in Armenia in any case.
So the foreign policy might not change, but what might be the future? Let's say there's a huge changing in the regime. in the conflict of the Nagorno-Karabakh?
There is understandable that while there is turbulence within Armenian country, for example, Azerbaijani regime may try to use this situation to change the balance of powers in Karabakh. And it's one of the points for Moscow to be concerned, not to let it happen. And but what also one another moment that as Sargsyan and as all his previous Armenian political leaders, they come from so-called Karabakh clan, and all they are connected to Karabakh, this elites of this republic, unrecognized. And the change of power, change of government in Armenia, it may lead to some new reset of talks between Armenia and Azerbaijan, as the Armenian leaders will be not from this Karabakh clan, but from maybe more ready to compromise with Baku, and it may give new opportunities for peaceful process in the Caucasus.
Now, to conclude this interview, we saw many actors from the public scene. I'm talking about Sargsyan and even Mr. Sargsyan, who publicly took position. What can and what will and what does the Western diaspora, Armenian diaspora, in this conflict? Does it have leverage in this situation?
Of course, Armenian diaspora is a very important factor within the internal Armenian politics, because as within Armenia lives 2 or 3 million people, I may be not very precise, the whole Armenian diaspora involved counts up to 10 million people. So there are more Armenians outside that within the country, yes, and they are much more. They are very influensive. They have as financial as media resources in the West, and that's why they have very serious impact on Armenian politics. And I wouldn't say that they play the first role in this protest, but that they do some financial and media aid to opposition, and they want the situation to change. It's obvious.
Well, thank you for this overview, and thanks to you, it's a bit clearer now.
Thank you.
That was a pleasure to invite you in the studio today. That was Anton Pechenkin, political analyst. Thank you for watching the program. Stay tuned for the rest.